This is a Great Reset propaganda compilation, featuring 8 videos from the series Fake News Propaganda Masterclass. In this series, you will learn that the mainstream media cannot be trusted. You'll see some of the sleaziest tricks to manipulate and deceive. You'll be shocked when you see these stories. I was. Having graduated with a communication degree back in the Cold War years, I thought propaganda was only something the Soviet Union did. I never imagined that the leading media in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom would ever devolve to such a duplicitous and anti-human level. But here we are. A compilation is important, so we can understand that this propaganda is part of a repeating problem. It cannot be excused as a one-off when we encounter it. Chapters are provided if you want to jump ahead. Other chapters can be viewed in any order. You'll see multiple examples of propaganda related to the Great Reset, a truly horrid book by Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum. And as the reset overlaps issues such as globalism, climate change, food production, and many others, you can expect a media group that lied to you about Klaus Schwab will lie to you about other subjects. Part 6 shows us with The Guardian displaying fake news in 3 separate articles involving politics, climate change, and the Great Reset. And Part 7, African Farmer Battles BBC Racists, isn't explicitly about the Great Reset, but uses many of the same techniques as the BBC story from Part 2. It shows how morally bankrupt a news organization can be, smearing a poor farmer and indeed his whole continent because he wants a tractor and running water for his mother. Get your Gravol before that one, as the BBC was thoroughly sickening. Fake news is often difficult to spot unless you know the topic well. I've studied what I call Klaus Schwab's trilogy: the Fourth Industrial Revolution, COVID-19, the Great Reset, and stakeholder capitalism. So I know most of the things the media labels as conspiracy theories are things Schwab said openly in his books. But how would the public know unless you've read the books? They're painful to read, so I've made separate videos including I read the Great Reset so you don't have to, another version being How Bad is the Great Reset Book, Top 10 Outrageous Great Reset Quotations, and What is Stakeholder Capitalism. Links are in the description. Part 1, The Worst Book Never Written. Welcome to the series, where you'll see the media doing backflips to cover for Klaus Schwab, author of the dreadful book COVID-19, The Great Reset. 7 months after the book launch, the Daily Beast did a hit piece on critics of the Great Reset. Mark Hay writes that the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory started by people from one conspiratorial echo chamber to the next, about elites opportunistically using the pandemic to serve their interests.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
The Great Reset isn't a secret when a G8 leader says it on national TV. So I'm going to warn a crock every time Mark writes conspiracy. So we're now on page 2, and Mark Hayes still claims the Great Reset is an invention of the far right rather than a book written by Klaus Schwab. On the third screen, conspiratorial social media circles push the conspiratorial Illuminati in conspiracy theories about insects. Still no sign of Klaus Schwab. Now Hay gets hateful, trying to smear Schwab critics as anti-Semitic, using the illogical guilt by association tactic. He makes 3 conspiracy theory accusations that have nothing to do with the Great Reset. Add 3 crocs. The next page is funny when Mark Hay finally mentions the World Economic Forum and how the Great Reset theorists are obsessed with the WEF, still missing that the Great Reset book was written by the CEO of the WEF. And the WEF has also in recent months put out a few articles about insect agriculture. What gaslighting! WEF has pumped them out for years. I found these articles from 2018 in a 5-second search, and I'm a computer dinosaur. 4 more conspiracy claims, up to 11. Another page, 3 more conspiracy references, still no sign of Klaus Schwab or the book The Great Reset. Another page, Mark Hay talks to the WEF, and yet there is still no mention of the book, Klaus Schwab, or co-author Terry Malret, who is also a WEF bigwig. Now WEF critics are labeled conspiracy theorists who literally believe in alien lizard people. Final page, still on a tangent. And 1 more conspiracy reference, so we end at 17. The whole article uses the straw man fallacy, falsely claiming that the issue is eating insects, when Mark K. knows quite well that the opposition to the Great Reset and the WEF focuses on many important issues that need to be openly discussed. So the gold medal goes to Mark Hay, who wrote the whole article without a single mention of Klaus Schwab or his book. The devil's finest trick is to persuade you that he does not exist. To learn more about an even bigger crock, click the box for the video on fake news from the BBC. Cheers. Part 2. The BBC. You're in for another wild story. Today's journalistic abomination is from the BBC. This article is very important for two reasons. One, it uses deceptive techniques that people should be aware of when consuming the news. Basically, it's a propaganda masterclass. Two, although the article is 2 years old, people are still linking it on social media, as if this is the ultimate authority on conspiracy theories. A search on X shows page after page of tweets that link the article, some very recent. Most just link the article without comment. Maybe they're bots, but I'd say they're people that have never read the Great Reset book and just let the BBC do the talking for them. The lies start right from the title. What is the Great Reset? The BBC says it's an initiative. Well, what is that supposed to mean? In fact, The Great Reset is a book written by Klaus Schwab. But look how far you have to get in the article before the book is even mentioned. The BBC doesn't tell the reader that the book was written by Schwab. Instead, Schwab is only identified as the other co-founder of the initiative, the first founder being the Prince of Wales. Co-founder because he appeared in a clip in a 1 minute 57-second video about the Great Reset that he didn't even narrate. In fact, there's only one brief reference to Charles in the 280-page book, when it praises Charles and Andrew Cuomo. Yes, that Andrew Cuomo, for building it back better. But the greatest sin of omission is that the BBC doesn't even tell its readers the full title of the book. COVID-19, The Great Reset. Then the article relentlessly attacks people as conspiracy theorists for linking the Great Reset with COVID. It's part of the title! The BBC doesn't tell its readers that the book supported all the lockdowns and actually criticized national leaders for not having more coordinated worldwide lockdowns. The last third of the book gaslights the readers to be thankful for the lockdowns, claiming COVID offered us the gifts of more time, greater stillness, more solitude. The book tells us Shakespeare wrote plays during the plague, and Pushkin's best work came during a cholera epidemic. Let's go back to the start. Propaganda demonizes opponents. Hijacked is a good word choice, as hijackers are evil, essentially terrorists. The goal, of course, is to appeal to emotions, not reason. And the term conspiracy theorist is an offensive smear. It's saying the theory isn't just incorrect, it's a lie, a fabrication, and the theorists are crazy or delusional. Another red flag is that no author is named. Easier to lie when it doesn't hurt your reputation. Be leery of articles quoting anonymous sources, or articles that say, according to experts, if the experts are unnamed. Like, wouldn't you want to know the name of the top scientist that said the world was supposed to end by June? And in this article, the alleged conspiracy theorists are anonymous. Dehumanized. Boogeymen, not human beings. And you can't research them to see if the BBC portrayed them fairly. This part is interesting. It says the plan is light on specific detail, the scope is huge, and it has a lack of clarity. So BBC is saying it's badly written, but then blames the critics for not interpreting it like the BBC. And we don't even know if anyone at the BBC actually read the book. It's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean. Oh, note the indirect language. It is difficult to see, rather than I can't see, or it is difficult for the BBC to see. Or even here, there's a book, rather than Schwab wrote a book. This section gives some balance. It talks about legitimate criticism of the Great Reset, environmental policies could hurt the economy, questions about whether unelected people should have the power to transform the global economy, concerns about the impact of technology on civil liberties and jobs. All positive, right? It's not all bogus conspiracy theory. It's legitimate criticism. Oh, but wait, look at the header. It contradicts the text. So people who skim the article might see a conspiracy theory is born, and easily miss the parts about legitimate criticism. However, if you accuse BBC of bias, they'll just point to the 2 paragraphs and say, hey, we cover both sides of the debate. It's a common fake news technique. And put the propaganda in the headlines, photo, and opening paragraph, and put the necessary facts much later in the story, so that skimmers are more likely to miss them. Let's look at some sleazy photo tricks. Or remember those Twitter links? Now let's look at the thumbnail. A group of people, BBC News, and this woman with the Great Reset sign, the poster girl for the hijackers and the Great Reset conspiracy theory. Oh wait, she isn't protesting the Great Reset. There could be hundreds or thousands at this rally, and this man may be the only one protesting the reset, but BBC uses him to misrepresent the whole group. The same tactic was used in the Canadian Freedom Convoy. The fake news photographed one guy with the Confederate flag to say the whole convoy was filled with white supremacist hate groups. They didn't report that he was quickly asked to leave.
We called him out. He knows. He's going to hold his head in shame now.
And here, instead of saying BBC News, it says Getty Images. So this is a stock photo. BBC wasn't there, never interviewed any of the people pictured, doesn't know the name of the man with the sign, or why he opposes the reset, so they have no information indicates he believes in a conspiracy theory. He might have the legitimate concerns the BBC listed. What's the word when you make judgments about people without having any information? And BBC conveniently cropped out these signs from the Twitter thumbnail. This is Jacinda Ardern, then Prime Minister of New Zealand. And surprise! BBC doesn't say anything about her in the photo caption. Schwab praised her in COVID-19, the Great Reset. And in his sequel, Stakeholder Capitalism, Schwab spends 6 pages praising her willingness to crash the economy with lockdowns. In fact, in August 2021, she locked down the entire country for exactly 1 COVID case. Later, she blamed cows for global warming and imposed a cow burp tax on farmers, basically going to war with the country's leading industry. She resigned this year when she was polling at 29% support. So it's a disgrace that BBC demonizes Ardern's critics as crazy conspiracy theorists hijacking a good cause. Justin Trudeau made a speech. I'll show you a clip in a minute. The BBC wants you to believe that everyone who reacted to that speech on Facebook is a conspiracy theorist, and that the spike in November on the graph proves that Trudeau's speech stoked the tinfoil hats. In fact, BBC has no idea what was said in those posts. Many of them might actually support the Great Reset. The chart will fool most people. Visually, the November spike is impressive. But there are 3 billion monthly users on Facebook, 2 billion every day. So 34,000 Facebook posts are negligible. And even assuming the 23,000 extra posts from October to November were all Canadians, it's still a tiny amount for a country of 39 million people. There were probably more Canadians on Facebook talking about Taylor Swift. BBC gave readers a box to click to watch Charles' video, and no link is offered for the Trudeau video, which they don't want you to see, as it mimics Schwab saying the pandemic represents an opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset for a more equitable and prosperous future.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
So in November 2020 in Canada, people were dying of a new disease. Businesses were closed. Billions upon billions of stimulus had been spent so that people thrown out of work could pay rent. Most government employees were working from home for fear of spreading the disease at the office. And Trudeau picked that moment to say the pandemic was an opportunity to embark on new climate change projects and completely revamp or reset government programs. Incredible! And any Canadian questioning the wisdom of this is branded a conspiracy theorist. Damn you, BBC. Here's a bad joke. It's unclear whether he was referring to the WEF plan.
I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young noble leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Still unclear? On the WEF website, we see Canada's finance minister and deputy prime minister is on the board of trustees. In his book, Schwab talks about not letting the COVID crisis go to waste and praises the EU for using the crisis to advance the green agenda, though he doesn't tell you the plan involves cutting food production through quotas and restrictions on fertilizer use, forcing farmers off their land, and culling livestock herds. And as we watch Trudeau openly say the pandemic is a pretext for environmental policies, BBC says some claimed, letting hateful readers believe that those claims were just lies. Unclear, and some claimed, are attempts at obfuscation, or in Croc terms, muddying the waters, which is followed by guilt by association. BBC wants people to transfer their dislike of Donald Trump to critics of WEF. Share the hatred, and they provide no evidence of even one person connected. 75 million voted for Trump, so even if their claim were true, thousands of Trump supporters represent a tiny fraction. But most important, critics were right about radical climate policy. Biden nixed the Keystone Pipeline on day one, banned some oil drilling. His climate czar John Kerry is a big fan of the Great Reset and is now pushing to cut food production, to cut emissions. Conspiracy or not, people will go hungry as a result. The guilt by association resumes with a hypertext link to this article that has nothing to do with the Great Reset. BBC argues that a nefarious group of people who had never met before, including tourists, a granny with breast cancer, and a guy with a Viking helmet, left their guns at home and went to the capital to overthrow the government. Sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. Honest reporting gives both sides of the story. This isn't honest. People are smeared without being given a chance to respond. BBC doesn't tell a reader that J.P. Sears is a comedian. Now, they won't distinguish between conspiracy and joke. They also don't tell you that a satire about own nothing and be happy is based on a serious video that the World Economic Forum produced and ran on its website for years. Franklin Graham doesn't mention the Great Reset, but he's lumped in with the conspiracy theorist hijackers. It looks like anti-Catholic bigotry that the BBC accuses a bishop of being a conspiracy theorist without actually showing his letter or letting him defend his views. It's just more guilt by association, smearing Great Reset critics by associating them with Donald Trump and religious conservatives, and then smearing Trump and religious conservatives by associating them with the alleged conspiracy theorists. Circle of hate. Oh, by the way, in the book, Schwab calls patriotism and religion a toxic mix. Sounds a bit intolerant to me. This tweet is cut off in case the reader might agree. As for global surveillance, for years WEF has openly pushed the central bank digital currencies, which would allow governments to monitor every cent you spend. The book calls for more funding for the WHO, so it can monitor patients around the world. It talks about contact tracing systems being used for non-medical purposes after the pandemic. Schwab's previous book also touted emerging surveillance technologies. And the BBC surely knows that their ex-PM was a WEF superstar who pushed medical passports, digital IDs. Now he wants digital libraries, so your medical records could be available to people anywhere in the world. You might remember that Tony Blair is among the most notorious conspiracy theorists in history, pushing the bogus claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and leading the United Kingdom into a war that killed 400,000 civilians. Tweet about Trudeau, BBC condemns you. Destroy a country, get a free pass. This section is funny as it uses the classic crock techniques, starting with the nameless experts. Experts of what? Have these people even read any of Schwab's books? The book came out before the COVID vaccines, so any discussion of vaccines has nothing to do with Great Reset criticism, although the BBC uses guilt by association to transfer readers' hatred of anti-vaxxers to Schwab critics. The theory that evil microchips are embedded in vaccines is so ridiculous it must be a joke. We've already seen BBC doesn't recognize humor. Once again, it's the straw man fallacy. Can't win a fight against a real opponent? Create a straw man, it's easier to knock down. Don't debate the Great Reset, or you'd have to read the book first. Just misrepresent the opposition and lead the reader to click on the irrelevant straw man of choice. Lies right to the end. BBC claims the Great Reset emphasizes green infrastructure, but there was only one sentence on the topic in a 280-page book. Schwab and Malloret spent more time talking about the George Floyd riots, how bats and pangolins caused the epidemic, and why few stage plays were written about the 1918 flu epidemic. The lack of emphasis is why BBC earlier described the reset as vague, light on specific detail, lacking in clarity, and it's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean in practice. And they say this meme is frightening.
That's gonna scare you, believe me.
Memes aren't as frightening as reality, like politicians intentionally creating food shortages. There's an earlier BBC article that proves that the fact-checkers can be the worst fake news propagandists. The BBC says the Great Reset criticism is a baseless conspiracy theory. But remember, the previous article outlined legitimate criticism from a variety of sources, and their list isn't even complete. For example, it omits how WEF-style globalization aims to bypass national democracies. This article makes no mention of the book. Here, the Great Reset isn't just a plan, it's a genuine plan. Despite being vague, light on specific detail, having lack of clarity, and it's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean in practice. The biggest lie of the article is the plan explores how countries might recover from the economic damage caused by the pandemic. The book argues the opposite. Schwab calls on people to lower consumption and shrink the economy for the sake of the planet. And the ultimate goal is degrowth, the equitable downsizing of the economy, leading to a future where we can live better with less, especially if it comes with depopulation. And the BBC gaslights its readers into believing Justin Trudeau has nothing to do with Schwab or the Great Reset.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
It even gives Trudeau a platform to smear critics for disinformation. And it goes on with more Trump derangement syndrome, guilt by association, straw man fallacies. It's supposed to be a fact check, but it's 7 pages of opinions aimed at hiding the facts. There's a mention of masks, but no clinical studies quoted. I'll let the viewer decide which of BBC's conspiracy theories turned out to be spoiler alerts. Part 2 follow-up. 1 year after uploading the video, I searched X to find many people were still posting links to the BBC article. This one intrigued me because Phonix posted the link, replying to his own post. So I wrote to some of these people to ask why they thought a 3-year-old article was so important. The only one who responded was Joe Canadian. Hashtag never vote conservative, lists blocked, no DMs, and RWNJs get blocked, meaning right-wing nut jobs. Joe had posted the article in response to B. Gates is a Pisco, who's not likely to read the article. It's just Joe's way of implying B. Gates is a conspiracy theorist. So Joe told me the Great Reset was all about sustainable development. He hadn't read Schwab's book, so he didn't know the Reset's goal was really degrowth, the opposite of development. He said the BBC explained the conspiracy theory of the Reset, but didn't explain what the Great Reset really is. I pointed out that the BBC actually counted as conspiracy theorists anyone who tweeted about Trudeau, without even knowing what they said in the tweets. And people who had never heard of the Great Reset were branded by BBC as Great Reset conspiracy theorists if they opposed school closures or cancellation of cancer screening. Joe's response? I don't do conspiracy theories, as they're all BS. If that's all you want to talk about, I suggest you ask someone else. I left it at that. As Thomas Sowell said, it's usually futile to try to talk facts and analysis to people who are enjoying a sense of moral superiority in their ignorance. But thanks to Joe, we learned that the BBC's hateful propaganda can retain a strong grip on people, even years later. Part 3. AI is fake news. Ah, crap. Skynet's here, and they think I'm a conspiracy theorist. Something happened when I was working on a video to be called The CBC Hates Your Guts, as part of my fake news propaganda masterclass series that looks at news outlets running cover for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, usually by branding as conspiracy theorists anyone who criticizes them. First, some background. I jumped a chapter if you've seen the clip.
Names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on. that we penetrate the cabinets. Yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young noble leaders of the World Economic Forum.
That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now.
Would Klaus lie? We need to see the WEF website to find Chrystia Freeland, our finance minister and deputy prime minister, is on the board of trustees of the WEF. Shouldn't that be illegal? That's a conflict of interest. But what other cabinet ministers are for Schwab? We need to see what happens when Colin Carey asks the question in Parliament.
I had a constituent that wanted me to ask a question about outside interference to our democracy. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has, quoted, infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy.
Order. I know that the member was in a really good question there, but the audio is really bad, and the video is really bad as well. And I apologize. I don't know if the member. Okay, let's try again. The honorable member for Timmins James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, that member was promoting open disinformation. That's not debate. We have to call out disinformation.
We'll get into debate again.
CBC's fake news response to Carey's question was this article, hatefully branding Carey a conspiracy theorist for his question. But to get the screenshot, I first needed to retrieve the article. Bing! There it is. Oh, but then I noticed a robot, basically calling Colin Carey a conspiracy theorist, part of a disinformation campaign. I repeated the search several times, each time getting a slightly different answer. This version calls them bad actors, others lecture about spreading conspiracy theories. So here's my exchange. The first comment, if you're asking about the conspiracy theory surrounding the World Economic Forum and Colin Carey, as if his question actually was a conspiracy theory and that he himself is surrounded in a conspiracy theory. And it goes on to side with the WEF official, calling it disinformation. Now I clicked on one of their suggested questions, who was Klaus Schwab, got a standard bio, then clicked another suggested question. Why did Colin Carey raise concerns about outside interference in democracy? Well, HAL 9000 didn't give any new information, same WEF talking points. But Carey never used the word trained, so I asked. Answer. When Klaus Schwab said that the WEF had trained Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and more than half of his cabinet, he was referring to the WEF's effort to promote stakeholder capitalism and sustainable value creation. That's followed by a promotion for their report, measuring stakeholder capitalism toward common metrics and consistent value creation. And note everything is marked with a footnote 1, which is the World Economic Forum itself. The bot is actually confirming Carey was correct to say that Canada's cabinet was trained by WEF. My next question. When you answered the question, why did Colin Carey raise concerns about outside interference in democracy, why didn't you mention the video Carey was referencing, which showed Klaus Schwab saying he had penetrated the cabinets of Canada, Argentina, and France? Answer. You are correct that there is a video circulating on social media that shows Klaus Schwab saying he had penetrated the cabinets of countries such as Canada, Argentina, and France. The video has been taken out of context and is being used to spread disinformation about the WEF. Adrian Monk, managing director of the WEF, has responded to criticism about disinformation campaigns targeting the WEF, stating that the WEF does not prescribe policy, but rather acts as a forum for the exchange of ideas. Note the footnotes number 2. It's the CBC that labeled Carey for disinformation. And my next question, how can you claim Colin Carey was spreading misinformation when he quoted Klaus Schwab accurately? Why don't you accuse Adrian Monk of misinformation by ignoring the fact that Klaus Schwab said openly that we penetrate the cabinets? Answer. The video has been taken out of context. and is being used to spread disinformation about the WEF. And again, footnotes lead to the CBC. Why do you say that Colin Carey took the video out of context? And the answer is because it has been taken out of context. Why do you believe Adrian Monk more than Colin Carey? Just because Adrian Monk responded to criticism doesn't mean his response was correct. As an AI language model, I do not have beliefs or opinions. My role is to provide factual information and help you understand the context of the situation. Then it repeats the same quotes from the CBC, saying WEF is good, Carey in the video are disinformation. So if the AI's role is to provide factual information, what facts are you using when you say Schwab's video was taken out of context? The video circulating on social media was edited to remove the context of Schwab's remarks, which were made in reference to the WEF's efforts to promote stakeholder capitalism. Whether you like stakeholder capitalism or hate it, doesn't change anything about the number of cabinet ministers signing up for WEF. This gem of an answer was from USA Today, including the Adrian Monk comment, which they got from the CBC radio interview. So there you have it. AI considers the CBC the arbiter of truth. Garbage in, garbage out. Click the playlist for other videos in the series. Comment and subscribe, as I desperately need favor from YouTube's AI overlord. Part 4. The CBC hates your guts. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation hates your guts. I know that's a bold claim to make, but in today's examples, we'll see them lie to their audience, hide information that the reader needs to know, and basically insult anyone who disagrees with their narrative, even in news stories rather than editorials. And this video is the third in the fake news propaganda series. You can watch them in any order. And again, I focus on media doing backflips to attack critics of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Our first headline labels people as conspiracy theorists. And the hatred starts right from the first photo caption. One protester holds a sign referring to the Great Reset conspiracy theory. A bold-faced lie. The sign refers to the Great Reset book in which Klaus Schwab supports every COVID lockdown measure and claims COVID gave us the gifts of more time, greater stillness, more solitude. The CBC uses the tactic we saw in part 1 of this series, where Mark Hay pretends Schwab didn't write the book, so we can label critics as conspiracy theorists, and that label is a hateful smear aimed to offend. It doesn't just mean you disagree. It means your opinion has no value because you're crazy and delusional. It's a way of censoring people and cutting off civil debate. Now, the people in the photo are protesting lockdowns in Quebec, among the strictest in the world, with curfews and huge fines for not wearing masks outdoors. But the CBC doesn't say lockdowns. No, it's measures by the government to stop the spread of COVID. Wow, what bias. Now let's go back to the headline. The article is about emails complaining about an idea to bring in a UBI, Universal Basic Income. The article has nothing to do with lockdowns, the Great Reset, or the Montreal demonstration. It's just a gratuitous smear. The CBC exploits the people in the photo, reinventing them as poster boys and girls of conspiracy theorists. If you protested lockdowns because your business was closed, or you lost your job, you're a conspiracy theorist to the CBC. Concerned that lockdowns gave your kids depression and anxiety issues? Conspiracy theorist. Complain that lockdowns canceled your cancer screening or your knee replacement operation? Conspiracy theorist. Everyone in the crowd has a story, but CBC isn't interested. To them, people are nameless, voiceless plebs. Dehumanized. They hate us. The photo also uses the same sleazy techniques as the BBC. Remember in part 2, the BBC used this woman as the poster girl for the Great Reset conspiracy theory, though the real story shows that she was protesting something else, like curfews or bans on outside gatherings. Can you find any Great Reset signs in these other photos of the Montreal demo? CBC stereotyped the entire crowd based on just one guy's sign. What shameful prejudice. The article says tens of thousands of people have contacted senators to oppose a bill about universal basic income, many of them based on outlandish conspiracy theories. Many, but not most. So CBC's criticism is about a minority of those emails. It doesn't say how many. To me, 100 could be many, but out of tens of thousands of emails, that might not even be newsworthy. And what's the CBC's definition of a conspiracy theory? Oh, the photo caption is labeling people as conspiracy theorists for asking for freedom. The sad joke of this article is that nobody wrote to the senators to show any support. It's a bad idea, even if any opponents were over the top. John Tasker tries to discredit opponents for even caring, and since the bill only creates a framework to study the idea, and the government has been cool to the idea. Not true. UBI was already on the agenda at the Liberal National Convention. Hey, look, it's the same journalist. Tasker says opposition to the basic income bill is a well-organized campaign. Organized by whom? The only so-called conspiracy theorist named in the article is Peter Terrace. But he didn't organize anything. He just sent one tweet. He didn't even email a senator. Now let's click this hyperlink. Hey, it's the same photo. They walk down the street with handmade signs, and the CBC calls them digital mercenaries. Your taxes fund the CBC, which then accuses you of disinformation for saying freedom is good. Yeah, what could be worse than being slandered and belittled, not once but twice, by your national broadcaster? Oh, there's a third post. And who knows if there are even more. This one claims the Great Reset stemmed from an idea proposed by WEF. Which idea? It's a 280-page book with controversial ideas on a variety of topics, including a claim that pangolins were partly responsible for COVID, and a prediction that inflation and interest rates would be low for a long time after the pandemic. So CBC examines the potential consequences of mainstream Canadian politicians amplifying suspicions about the organization, which is their way of saying criticizing WEF is bad. A pretty one-sided view by people that have never read the book. This next section only sounds crazy, but the vast majority is true. I'll just deal with a couple. The transhumanism cyborg thing comes from Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution, along with articles on the WEF website and speeches on the WEF stage, proposing brain implants, cybernetic prostheses, human genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and I've already covered depopulation in my video on stakeholder capitalism, with, among other things, a clip of Jane Goodall proposing we lower the world population from 8 billion to 500 million. Here, the CBC wants to spread the hatred, so they blame the letters on the trucker convoy. Well, Trudeau froze bank accounts of people who protested him, so people aren't more paranoid, they're just waking up more. Then CBC smears the social conservatives. Oh, they must be conspiracy theorists. They linked Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland with the WEF and lie that WEF wants to introduce a universal basic income. What the fake news CBC hides from its audience is that Freeland isn't just linked with the WEF, she's on their board of trustees. And WEF has been promoting universal basic income for years. I searched for universal basic income on their website and got 1,200 hits. It's the CBC spreading the misinformation, while LifeSite answers the 5 W's, saying who would qualify, what they would get, annual cost, and another W, what could possibly go wrong? Got people giving up work, population dependent on government, higher taxes, and so on. In the end, that $85 billion is paid by the people writing to those senators, either through taxes, lower benefits, or inflation if the government just prints more money. The last 2 pages are a total crock. The Great Reset lives on, as if this is the conclusion. But this is the first reset reference since the first photo. This professor says, the WEF is at the center of so many COVID-related conspiracies because in 2020, unnamed leaders talked about a Great Reset to evaluate how the economy is structured. Duck! If you'd read the book, you would know that WEF is at the center of COVID-related criticism because WEF founder Klaus Schwab wrote the book COVID-19, The Great Reset, where he says horrific things like the COVID-19 crisis cannot go to waste, and simple pleasures like smelling a melon or squeezing a fruit will be frowned upon and may even become a thing of the past. Doesn't look like he knows the book exists, or that his own prime minister said,
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
He hasn't read any of the letters sent to the senators, yet he insults the writers. Oh, that's ignorance and prejudice at work. Oh, then he notes a decline in people's trust in government, the press, academics, and experts. Whoa! My trust in these people declined just by reading this article. And now some fun facts. When they updated the article, they replaced the photo of this senator with a photo of a lockdown march in the Netherlands. That has nothing to do with this article about letters to Canadian senators debating UBI. Of course, CBC wants you to think the photo is proof that crazy people are linking Klaus Schwab to COVID. But the banner is only quoting the cover of his book, which they want you to believe was never written. When they switched the photo, they didn't bother to correct the typo. It still says, "some its leaders." And worse, CBC should have deleted the blunder about the Liberals being cool to the idea of UBI after the party voted 77% in favor. Fun facts? We saw how both the BBC and CBC used a single reset sign to smear a whole crowd. Then, when they wanted to target social conservatives, both smeared lifesitenews.com with no supporting evidence. And also strange that both stories had nearly the same subheadings near the end. It looks like the same playbook. Like the BBC story, CBC used the straw man fallacy. Misrepresent your opponent's arguments, then knock them down rather than fight a real opponent. That's why they never showed the letters or tweets from the alleged conspiracy theorists. They never interviewed them because that would allow them a chance to defend themselves. Our second CBC story also uses techniques used in the BBC story, burying the lead and covering your ass. We go backwards in time to when Justin Trudeau said
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
Naturally, the opposition was outraged. The leader of the opposition at the time posted this. It's hard to believe anyone will look at the carnage caused by COVID-19 and see an opportunity. This is not the time for a massive and risky experiment to reimagine the economy. You might expect the next headline to read something like, Trudeau blasted for using pandemic as opportunity. But the CBC carries water for Trudeau and the WEF, so this was the coverage. The Great Reset reads like a globalist plot with some plot holes. What? Well, let's flip through pages 1, 2, 3. Okay, here he is on 4, 5, 6, 7, and a bit. So Aaron O'Toole's side of the story ending up on page 4 is what I call burying the lead. Now, most people only read the headline in the first couple paragraphs of these articles. Or they would read about Pierre Poilievre brushing up with conspiracy theorists and miss Aaron O'Toole's attack on Trudeau and his opportunity for a reset. Still, by including O'Toole's argument at all, the author can claim balance, repping both sides of the story. So he's covering his ass. Now, it would be a filthy lie to call Poilievre a conspiracy theorist. So to cover his ass, the reporter only says that Poilievre brushes up with conspiracy theorists.
What does that mean?
By just mentioning Poilievre and conspiracy in the same sentence, CBC hopes the reader will connect guilt by association. The article is mostly about O'Toole, but it leads with Poilievre. And without the Poilievre section, the article would start with O'Toole's criticism of Trudeau, and more people would read that message. So, voila, burying the lead. So CBC tries linking Poilievre to some conspiracy theories in circulation, without saying what they are, and globalist plots without any explanation. Now let's blow the lid off CBC's lie. The claim is that Poilievre linked Trudeau's comments to a call for a great reset made in June by Klaus Schwab, a straw man saying tinfoil hat people are overreacting to just one line from a speech, when Poilievre is really referring to Schwab's book, which pushes globalism. Schwab wants power controlled by global governments like the UN. In the book he says, put bluntly, we live in a world in which nobody is really in charge, because each nation decided its own COVID response, rather than everyone following a central regulator. He called for more funding for the WHO, so they could exert more power. Yeah, imagine Bill Gates setting the rules for healthcare in Canada, and you never have a right to vote them out. The globalist agenda is playing out in Europe, as EU bureaucrats in Brussels are deciding how much fertilizer farmers in Poland can use, how many cows you could own in France or Ireland, and even forcing Dutch farmers off their land. Schwab praises the European Commission for this, calling it the most tangible manifestation yet of public authorities deciding not to let the COVID-19 crisis go to waste. Aaron Wary mentioned Stephen Harper was a guest speaker at Davos. But unlike Trudeau, Harper wasn't glowingly praised by Schwab on stage for being a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, along with half his cabinet, including the Deputy Prime Minister on their board of trustees. Wary is a senior writer. He must know these things. And the word shadowy pops up a lot in these articles. By definition, conspiracies are secret. So when the fake news media falsely accuses people, they pretend these stories have shadowy or spooky characters. But the fact is, there is no secrecy in these complaints against the Great Reset. For example, the X account of Anti-WEF, with 185,000 followers, displays famous WEF supporters, names, shows pictures, shows clips of WEF's speeches, links to WEF's website. Everything is documented from sources in plain sight. And yes, Mr. Wary, we should have a reality-based debate about these issues. But it's the CBC that's blocking the debate by duping its readers with this spooky conspiracy nonsense. Then out of nowhere, Wary questions Poilievre's behavior. For what? Giving the Great Reset a bad book review? And nothing about Trudeau's behavior. Then click this blue hypertext about behavior to get to this unhinged article with 13 screens of abuse. I won't go beyond this page because it isn't a CBC story. CBC hates Poilievre so much that it linked to a competitor's website to dogpile him. Writer Rachel Gilmore prides herself on being a nuisance and was fired in 2023 after posting horrible personal attacks on Poilievre's wife. CBC wanted a bigger attack dog, so they linked to Rachel. They want you to read this article so much that clicking conspiracy theorists also gets you to the same article. Whereas if you want to know what they mean by brushed up, you're out of luck. Clicking there leads to the BBC's phony fact check we saw in part 2 of our series. I need a laugh, so we'll move on. In other videos I've shown where Klaus says
that we penetrate the cabinet,
and that Trudeau and half his cabinet are World Economic Forum young global leaders. And then Colin Carey asks,
in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda?
So here's CBC's response. World Economic Forum official says Canada has bigger issues to discuss than conspiracy theories. What a hilarious lack of self-awareness. Canada has bigger issues to discuss than conspiracy theories? So Canada's national broadcaster writes yet another article discussing conspiracy theories and hyperlinking to even more discussions about conspiracy theories. Then they link to their competitors' conspiracy theory stories. Politicians should ask whether they're spreading misinformation from bad actors. Wow, Colin Carey quoted Klaus Schwab accurately, and this article smears him for disinformation. Here's another one denying the existence of the book. Great Reset, lowercase, it's just an opinion piece. I'll put all happy buzzwords in a short piece and leave controversial stuff for the book in Schwab's name. Nice trick here. After Conservative MP Colin Carey told the House of Commons WEF had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet, he was accused of spreading disinformation by NDP's Charlie Angus. True, in the full clip we saw Angus accuse Carey, but CBC knows that accusation was false. By that point, Schwab's video had been circulating 5 years. They could have asked Adrian Monk how many cabinet ministers were on board with WEF. Oh, that would have been real journalism. And we've seen Charlie Angus before. He was part of the story where the people demonstrating in person are labeled digital mercenaries. They don't believe media. Well, no wonder, Charlie. You're part of the problem. CBC's hatred resumes. Adrian Monk accuses WEF critics of anti-Semitism. Oh, we've seen this before in part 1. Old farts like Goebbels accused Jews of seeking power. So now anyone warning of excessive government powers must hate Jews. It's about as logical as saying Tom Selleck must be a Nazi because he and Hitler both had brown mustaches. CBC throws feces at the Freedom Convoy. Concerns about the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, and the apparent plan to turn Canada into a communist state is one of the underlying conspiracy theories that motivated some of the protesters who participated in the truckers' protest. Some? Did any protester actually say this? Or are you just assuming they thought that way based on your own prejudice? I went to the convoy 3 times, each time seeing thousands of people. I also saw 20 hours of live streams. I didn't see any signs protesting the Great Reset or WEF. The only people talking about communism were immigrants from communist countries, protesting mandates that looked like the things that were done in those repressive regimes that they escaped. And that was before Trudeau froze truckers' bank accounts. Personally, lockdowns closed social clubs, my sports, yoga classes, the gym. I gained weight due to a lack of exercise, boredom, and the need for comfort foods. My blood pressure went up, as did my risk for heart disease and diabetes. I didn't see most of my friends for 2 years. They were too afraid to meet. I wasn't allowed to visit my brother because he was in another province. I went through the worst depression of my life, but countless people had it much worse than me. And the CBC and a useful idiot politician tell us we supported the Freedom Convoy because of conspiracy theories. Duck you. Happily, the CBC ran out of venom at the end, so I'll read some of it with some calming scenery. In a statement to CBC News, Polyev said the annual WEF meeting in Davos is a hypocritical gathering of billionaires, multinationals, and powerful politicians who lecture working class people to stop buying gasoline. There's no apparent benefit to Canadians. Taxpayers should not need to pay to send government leaders to such a meeting. Rather, ministers should put their full attention to serving everyday people in Canadian communities. Click the playlist or related video box for another in this series, or check my channel page for more choices. Part 4 Addendum. The CBC chapter could have been much larger, as there were other Great Reset stories I could have used, and I'd planned more Canadian propaganda videos. The Toronto Star had articles claiming that the Great Reset was a conspiracy theory without mentioning the book. The CTV News also claimed Trudeau's reset was a conspiracy theory, even in articles that referred to Trudeau's video. Worse yet, Global News posted Trudeau's video on its YouTube channel, but later published articles saying it was a conspiracy theory that Trudeau wanted a reset. I could have done an entire video just on Global's hit piece by Rachel Gilmore. Later I made a video about another Global News story. Earth facing dire sea level rise up to 20 meters, which I thought at first was an April Fool's joke on X, as Global News' sea level prediction is at least 20 times higher than the worst case scenario predicted by the IPCC. But alas, I put aside all these other Canadian stories when I found out what NPR was doing. Part 5. Eat bugs, save Jews. NPR is fake news. Welcome to another fake news dumpster fire. I've labeled other videos in the series Propaganda Masterclass, but in today's examples, NPR shows no mastery and no class. It's all baseless smear. We start with this bombastic headline. This right-wing conspiracy theory about eating bugs is about as racist as you think. And who are these evil right-wing conspiracy theory racists? Farmers. Working class people who put food on your table. NPR starts his radio show with a speech by politician Thierry Baudet to a group of Dutch farmers. Baudet pulls out a bag of mealworms to gross out the crowd, says the government will force people to eat bugs, and is instantly labeled a racist by NPR. Gene Demby, who runs NPR's Racism Beat, explains that there's been conspiracy theories about Jews trying to gain power. So Baudet's claim of government food choices is anti-Semitic racism. We've seen this tactic in part 1 of the series, where Mark Hay attacks critics of the Great Reset, and in parts 3 and 4, when Adrian Monk labels critics of the World Economic Forum as anti-Semitic. And none of them provided a shred of evidence that even one of the so-called conspiracy theorists had said anything about Jews, let alone attacked them. It's total fabrication. NPR avoids the real issue, drastic food cuts in the Netherlands, where the government is trying to close a third of its farms, kicking people from the land its families have farmed for generations or centuries, reduce livestock herds by up to 50%, and cut fertilizer use up to 70%, which will devastate yields and impoverish whoever is still allowed to farm. NPR should mention that the Netherlands is the number 2 food exporter in the world, meaning any production cuts will result in higher prices and food shortages in other countries. And that production creates jobs, wealth, and tax revenues. And without it, the whole country gets poorer, even the Jews, and the government has less money to fund pensions, schools, and hospitals. But Hao Jingyan says this is a good thing because high-emission farms get bought out. But nailing farmers doesn't help the environment. To avoid starvation, people in other countries will have to open up new farms to make up the difference. And what will you eat when cows are banned? Well, the Netherlands is already introducing school kids to insects.
Mealworm.
Baudet didn't invent a thing. NPR never defines right-wing, but it's always meant as an insult. I always thought right-wing meant you wanted lower taxes. But here right-wing means you support farm workers, independent business, and people who buy food. And yet again we see the word shadowy. It's always a lie. The people they label as conspiracy theorists aren't imagining secret people. They're criticizing well-known leaders and official public policy. I will not eat the bugs became a meme on 4chan and emerged in conservative talk shows and political speech. But that doesn't mean it's a conspiracy theory or anti-Semitic. And we're going to have a good laugh when we answer NPR's question of why this bug issue has gained traction over the years. Here's NPR itself in 2008. Insects get a tasty makeover. NPR again. Maybe it's time to swap burgers for bugs, says UN. And the reason is the environment. NPR again. Insects may be the taste of the next generation, pushing the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the Man-Eating Bugs Cookbook. More NPR. These pictures might tempt you to eat bugs. Ooh, deep-fried tarantula. Yum. More NPR. The joys and ethics of insect eating. NPR again. 2015. Scorpion lollipops. This one says that international luminaries, like former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and the Food and Agriculture Organization, are raving about bugs over meat. To NPR, it's a conspiracy theory to say global elites are pushing bugs. But international luminaries, oh, that's different. Honestly, big shots in the UN are the definition of global elites. Now, NPR's favorite scientist? A bug-eating festival to indoctrinate the kids? An NPR edible insect radio show? Oh, this one is intended for kids. NPR again. Oh, here's another one that links to an article saying that beef is bad for the planet. NPR again. NPR's green argument for eating cicadas, which again highlights United Nations advice. So there's NPR, a government-owned, government-funded institution, promoting eating bugs for 15 years. But anyone else talking about bugs is a Jew-hating conspiracy theorist. Outrageous! So hateful! If they're such hypocrites, let's give them the 7 hippo salute. And the article is such a crock, we'll award NPR 7 crocks as well. But NPR is relentless. Here's another NPR story, recycling the artwork in many of the themes of the last article. It insists on the conspiracy theory labels, even after admitting the European Union approved mealworms and crickets. Yes, the same European Union that's forcing farmers in Netherlands, France, and Ireland to seriously reduce cattle production. They have the mandatory shadowy global elite lie, and the lie that bug critics are complaining about a shadow government involving Jewish people, even counting Orthodox Jew Ben Shapiro in the list of people spreading this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And NPR says the conspiracy theory got an extra boost during the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos in July 2020, when Chairman Klaus Schwab announced an initiative called a Great Reset. Wrong. Their annual meeting was in January. July was when Schwab's book was published, so naturally people start complaining about the Great Reset after that. Like BBC did, NPR calls the Great Reset an initiative rather than a book, just to confuse their audience. Because if you know it's a book, you could read the part where Schwab whines that there weren't enough lockdowns and travel restrictions because there wasn't a central power to enforce them on all countries. Or when the book praises the European Commission for adopting extremist climate policies, like those food production cuts, showing that they didn't let the COVID-19 crisis go to waste. Here's another story with all the same lies about shadowy ruling elites and anti-Semitism. This version claims that all the prominent conservatives got their opinions about bugs because of an anonymous meme on 4chan, but there's no evidence any one of them even saw it. Some of their intended gotcha moments are funny. Tucker Carlson, eating insects is repulsive and un-American. Well, NPR, don't call him a liar until you take an opinion poll of Americans showing the opposite. Paul Joseph Watson, you know who won't be eating bugs? Climate change technocrats. Now, before NPR calls him a conspiracy theorist, they might want to do a fact check. Does Joe Biden eat bugs? John Kerry or Klaus Schwab? Bill Gates? How about Justin Trudeau? Or any of the authors of those UN reports? Again, the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory about a WEF initiative. No mention of the book or Klaus Schwab. Easy to deflect criticism of a book if you pretend it was never written. Schwab wants people to go all in on climate change. And though the book doesn't mention insects, anyone following the World Economic Forum website knows they're pushing bugs for their climate agenda. They've even made videos about adding grubs or crickets to flour. NPR dishonestly labels Aldo Buttazzoni a conspiracy theorist just for asking people their opinion on the matter. NPR also labels as conspiracy theorists anyone opposed to their climate narrative. Here's their climate solutions reporter, Julia Simon. Climate disinformation in the past, sometimes paid for by fossil fuel interests, often related to false ideas that global warming is a scam or that the threat is overblown. Those falsehoods are still around, but what we're seeing a lot more of these days are attacks on climate solutions, even if we don't always know who funds them. Think attacks on renewables. Let's start here. We don't always know who funds them. So NPR says there are secret financiers, must be rich people, with the power to influence the public, maybe multinational oil guys. In other words, shadowy global elites are conspiring to fund nefarious anti-climate schemes. Hilarious! NPR is inventing its own conspiracy theories. And NPR's government funding creates its own biases. Thousands of government jobs depend on people supporting the climate agenda. But NPR also gets donations. Alan McLeod reported that Bill Gates has given hundreds of millions of dollars to media outlets to promote his global agenda. And NPR got the biggest payout, over $24 million. Bill's book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, outlines all the technologies the world will need for net zero carbon. And Gates has investments in nearly all of them, including 40 startups. When NPR rallies its audience for the climate, Gates has an easier time selling his products like fake meat or getting government grants to research his next money-making schemes. NPR's hateful propaganda says you are incapable of thinking on your own if you say solar isn't a good climate solution because it won't work at night or when covered in snow. NPR says you're a conspiracy theorist funded by evil rich guys. To NPR, the threat of global warming is never overblown. So it would be disinformation to remind people of the UN statement in 1989 that we only had until 2000 to solve CO2, or Al Gore's prediction of a rapid 20-foot rise in sea level, or St. Greta's tweet that says we all should have died last June. Whoa is back again with lies about the Great Reset conspiracy theory with the shadowy global Jewish elites. This version doesn't mention the Great Reset book, its author Klaus Schwab, or publisher WEF. It looks like David Folkenflick's job is to smear rival news outlets without any evidence, in the process insulting the millions of viewers who trust them rather than NPR. Funny to see Joe Rogan, a Bernie Sanders supporter, considered right-wing. NPR says Tucker Carlson made utterly unsubstantiated claims about dead whales. But if you click the blue type, you can see a fisheries expert substantiate the claims.
The only thing that has changed in the ocean is the surveying activities that have been going on for offshore wind farms, which are essentially carpet bombing the ocean floor with intense sound.
There's also a documentary by left-wing environmentalist Michael Schellenberger, which came out a month before the NPR article. Highly recommended. I'll put a link in the pinned comments and description sections so you can see it for free. Now here's a revealing opinion. In the end, it doesn't matter if 99% of the public believe in climate change. If you're able to embed real fear and seeds of doubt about the solutions that are on the table, you end up with the same outcome, which is no agenda, no policy, no action. What a crock. Joe Biden got 51% of the vote, but still managed to spend over $1 trillion on his green agenda. What kind of cult are you living in where you aren't happy with 99% of public support? They insist on 100% conformity. No tolerance for alternative views, no room to fear your policies could kill millions of people through starvation, make whales go extinct, or bankrupt governments. No doubts about their climate projections, the ability of their plan to succeed, or the leaders of their cause.
I'd probably have one of the highest greenhouse gas footprints of anyone on the planet.
NPR's conspiracy reporter also supports pre-bunking, which means accusing people of spreading misinformation before they do, so it's easier to attack them later. Is this news or psyops? These things have to appeal to the people you're trying to reach, I guess by playing on biases, not patronize them, and also acknowledge that known facts sometimes change as they have for COVID-19. I guess meaning that people with the facts that were labeled as conspiracy theorists have now been proven correct, and hopefully NPR will stop calling people Great Reset conspiracy theorists after someone there actually reads the book. Please check out other videos in the series, check the description and pinned comments for a link to the whale video, and if you can, please support your local food bank. Part 6. Fake News Propaganda Masterclass. The Guardian. We live in a clown world, and I had to laugh when I saw this story come across my MSN feed. From The Guardian, Biden comes out fighting after report questions his memory. Of course, the report refers to Biden's storing classified documents in various residences, like in his garage. The DOJ says classified Afghanistan war documents were in a badly damaged box in the garage near a collapsed dog crate, a dog bed, a Zappos box, an empty bucket, a broken lamp wrapped with duct tape, potting soil, and synthetic firewood. I don't want to mock Biden here. Aging isn't funny. But The Guardian is. The propaganda starts with the headline, Biden comes out fighting. Another Guardian article describes a fiery speech. You have the strongest picture they could find. So if you only read the first paragraph, Joe Biden came out swinging last night. My memory is fine. You'd have a favorable impression. But the real story comes later. The report actually concludes Biden was guilty, but some jurors wouldn't convict him because he's a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. In other words, his brain was so scrambled, he's not legally responsible. But if Biden's memory is as good as he says it is, then he really should go on trial. But The Guardian never raises that issue. Lies by omission. But the most spectacular error of omission is the end of the press conference, where Biden slowly walks away, appears confused, and comes back to the podium, and after some awkward shuffling, announces that the president of Mexico opened the border to Gaza. And The Guardian left that part out. Stunning.
The conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him.
The Mexico blunder is obvious. Mark Tice exposes many other mistakes, memory lapses, or outright lies in Biden's speech that any decent reporter should have pointed out, but not The Guardian. I'll put a link in the description. Now this cracks me up. The Guardian asking for paid subscriptions to support independent journalism. Because I've covered this story before of Bill Gates spending $300 million to buy off the media. And The Guardian got $13 million, second only to NPR. Gates wrote the book, How to Avoid a Climate Crisis, which outlines dozens of technologies that will be needed to reach net zero carbon. And Bill has investments in nearly all of them. The more media hypes global warming fears, the easier it is for Gates to get massive government grants and more sales of his fake meat and other wares. The Guardian has 13 million reasons to exaggerate climate change in the name of independent journalism. So you get abominations like this. Sea levels are going to rise by at least 20 feet. Harold Wanless doesn't tell us where he got the number of 20 or 30 feet, but says it's all but certain, and it might only take 100 years to get 20 feet. Now there's plenty of fiction here. He talks of all the ocean warming after 1930, but actually the world cooled from the 1940s to the 1970s. In fact, The Guardian itself was warning of an ice age in 1974. Today, oceans are rising about 2 millimeters a year, not 6. Here's a chart from NASA's Earth Observatory website. Here we are today, up a few centimeters from 2000. Here's the worst case scenario using the RCP 8.15 assumptions, which have been wildly inaccurate in the past. Sea level rises less than 4 meters by the year 2300. Now, nobody actually predicted 5 meters. NASA just left this part red to make the graph look more dramatic. The Guardian's 20-foot prediction is about 6.1 meters, which would be above the D, just above the edge of your screen, literally off the chart. Except that the Guardian says this can happen by 2121, 179 years ahead of schedule of the worst case scenario, above the X on the chart. Zero credibility. Now that's just one example. This fellow Tony Heller has published entire compilations exposing the Guardian's fake climate fear porn. I'll post a link. My earlier videos about fake news propaganda all showed media outlets that claimed the Great Reset was a conspiracy theory rather than a badly written book by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. So I had to see if the Guardian was also covering for Schwab. This one is classic. How the Great Reset of capitalism became an anti-lockdown conspiracy. The headline suggests that all the protesters in the photo are crazy Great Reset conspiracy theorists. But there's no sign in the photo saying anything about any reset. Well, the article says people had Great Reset signs, but how would Quinn know? He wasn't there. He didn't talk to any of the protesters to learn their stories. It's not even a Guardian photo. It's Shutterstock, and the author was an ocean away from the protest. So this is even worse than the BBC, which used a single sign to stereotype the whole crowd, as did the CBC, although the CBC used this photo for 3 different stories. Oh, it's hilarious that The Guardian refers to an airport book by Richard Florida, written 10 years before COVID or lockdowns, but says nothing about COVID-19, The Great Reset, a book that supported all the lockdowns and calls for greater powers for the WHO so someone can order worldwide lockdowns. The Guardian then pretends people are crazy to connect the Great Reset to COVID. Complete gaslighting. In its most implausible version, this conspiracy imagines that a global elite is using COVID-19 as an opportunity to roll out radical policies such as forced vaccinations, digital ID cards, and the renunciation of private property. But that's clearly what happened. No vaccine, you got fired from your job, banned from restaurants and airplanes, and vilified by politicians, the public, and most of all, media outlets like The Guardian. A former UK PM, Tony Blair, a big wig at the WEF, was promoting digital ID months before the Guardian article, and later moved on to vaccine passports and even digital medical libraries, so people in other countries could check your vax records. As for private property, lockdowns forced private businesses to close, family restaurants to shut, and the Canadian government even froze bank accounts of people protesting the vaccine mandates and blocked people from donating their own money to the protest. And as the Great Reset calls for governments to go gung-ho on climate change, we see policies aimed at putting farmers out of business, like forcing Dutch farmers off their land in the name of reducing emissions. And WEF's video saying, "You will own nothing and be happy," tells you what they think about private property. Like NPR and the BBC, The Guardian describes the Great Reset as an initiative by Prince Charles before he became king. They want you to think the reset is a 1 minute 57-second video, rather than a 280-page book. Like NPR, The Guardian likes to attack Fox News, even when Fox is correct. They want you to think Laura Ingraham is a conspiracy theorist for dissing lockdowners for their idea of never let a crisis go to waste. But Schwab literally said that in the book. And he went on to praise the European Commission for deciding not to let the COVID-19 crisis go to waste. The European Green Deal is the reason for all the farmers' protests going on in Europe today. The Guardian objects when Ingram says, powerful people began to use the pandemic as a way to force radical social and economic change. But that's exactly what Justin Trudeau said out loud.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Then The Guardian disputes Ingram's claim that Biden's people believe in the Great Reset, while Biden's climate envoy, John Kerry, talks the talk. Now, before the Guardian article, Kerry had famously spoken at the WEF, saying Americans chose the Great Reset over nationalism. So the Guardian published before Kerry said, the Great Reset will happen at greater speed and intensity than people might imagine. Some conspiracy theory, Guardian. More recently, Kerry plans to cut food production, which would cause poverty and starvation, while Kerry flies around in a private jet. Welcome to the Great Reset. And like all the other stories covered in this video series, this author accuses opponents of the WEF with disinformation. Of course, it's the Guardian spreading disinformation for writing about Great Reset conspiracy theories without ever having read the book or even admitting to its existence, or even talking to a single person that they accuse. And yet again, we see that guilt by association tactic with Donald Trump, as if all these lockdown protesters in Manchester and London, England, just spent 4 years cheerleading a US president who cut taxes too much. So the Guardian follows the playbook, with the 2 minutes of hate against anyone wanting freedom, sending Schwab's book down the memory hole, and hiding Biden's gaffes. Please comment and subscribe, and if you can, support your local food bank. Part 7. African Farmer Battles BBC Racists. I present to you a David versus Goliath story, pitting a poor African farmer against a multi-billion-dollar British Broadcasting Corporation. It's an important story because it shows how deceptive and hateful the mainstream media can be, gaslighting their own audience while making racist smears that show their colonizing mentality. The good part of the story is the Streisand effect. By attacking the farmer, the BBC actually brought more publicity to the issues he was trying to raise, and it accidentally exposed racist and anti-human ideas behind much of the net zero agenda. The hero of the story is Jasper Machogu from Kenya, an agricultural engineer, small-scale farmer. 28,000 followers on X, he's on Substack, and has 31 subscribers on YouTube. He educates the West about life in Kenya. There's little energy, so people might have to burn animal dung for heat for cooking. Their struggles involve getting clean water, installing a single electrical power line, and particularly farming low-tech style. Jasper offers a sustainable internship program for people willing to learn how farming is done without fossil fuels, and has invited staunch net zero activists like Greta Thunberg to try their hand. But they usually block them. Not a lot of takers, as it's tough physical labor. Here's a typical tweet. An average African consumes less electricity than an American refrigerator. In a month, my family of 6 consumes 14 kilowatt hours, compared to 45 for the fridge or 1,200 for the American. Africa has 17% of world population, but consumes 5% of world electricity. He has a wish list, a chemical fertilizer so his mom can stop the back-breaking job of spreading manure on the farm, a tap water and a refrigerator for mom, a tractor and labor-saving farm machines, reliable energy for Africa so they can add value to products. I want my people to have what the West has. Prosperity. Sure, he and Mum work hard, they should have all the good things that we do. Even if you worry about climate change, you'd have to be a psychopathic racist to think we have a right to these things while Africans don't. In the age of equity, equality, and Black Lives Are Awesome, surely nobody disagrees with Jasper Machogu. Wrong! The BBC hates his guts. How a Kenyan farmer became a champion of climate change denial. They hate him so much they unleashed their climate change disinformation reporter to denounce Jasper and call him a liar. The story is perfectly described in the cartoon. A tractor and fertilizer would help. What? Africans want fossil fuels? No effing way! Gonna take you down! The photo lacks context, as the article doesn't explain Jasper's sign. A BBC wants you to believe the man in the t-shirt is just a dumb African who scribbled nonsense on a used cardboard box. But he's not dumb, nor is the message. We drink oil as a metaphor, meaning oil is as important to modern society as drinking water is to life. Our food is produced by FF-made machines, that's fossil fuels, made with steel and plastics, powered by fossil fuels. Bill Gates in his book on climate says that 31% of man-made carbon emissions are from making raw materials. The most emissions come from producing cement, steel, and plastic, while aluminum, glass, and paper are also significant. Gates says to produce 1 ton of steel, you need to emit 1.8 tons of carbon dioxide. And plastic, which is made from fossil fuels, makes up 50% of the volume of car parts. So tractors and farm machinery? Fact check, true. And number 2, fertilizers are made from fossil fuels? True. Natural gas. And 50% of world population is fed by fertilizers. Also true. When Sri Lanka banned chemical fertilizers to lower emissions, crop yields dropped by 50 to 60%. So Jasper makes perfect sense. The text starts off with an offensive smear. Silva could use the term climate skeptic, but climate change denier has the connotation of Holocaust denier. He wants you to associate Jasper with the atrocities of the Nazis. It is Mr. Machogu's denial of man-made climate change that has helped supercharge his online profile. Another lie with no evidence. But the farming content does get the clicks. People applaud his desire to raise the standard of living in his own community and Africa as a whole. Since he began posting debunked theories, he has received thousands of dollars in donations, some of which come from individuals in Western countries linked to fossil fuel interests. Those countries being Canada and the US, where there is oil drilling, and people pay money to oil companies every 2 weeks when they fill up the gas tank. They send a few bucks to help a hard-working family man who might never afford a car. And those donations only total $9,000. Hardly the big conspiracy a BBC wants you to believe. Scientists have proven that the Earth is heating up because of greenhouse gases. A complete lie.
There's no such thing as settled science.
It's a theory, not proven, and it's hotly debated. The recent documentary Climate the Movie, Cold Truth, interviews over a dozen scientists that dispute the climate catastrophe narrative. Physics and meteorology professors, geologists, astrophysicists. There's NYU professor Stephen Koonin, a former top Obama science advisor who wrote the bestseller Unsettled. Will Happer, a retired Princeton professor who was science advisor to 3 presidents, and John Clauser, 2022 Nobel Prize winner for physics. So you can see through the BBC's sleaze. They want to stir up hatred towards climate skeptics. But instead of debating respected experts like a Nobel winner, they find a poor African farmer, a scapegoat, falsely accuse him of being the champion of the cause, then try to knock him down like a straw man. But they use personal attacks, since they have no moral or logical reason why his mum shouldn't have a fridge and the electricity to run it. Marco Silva has some issue with Jasper doing his own research into the topic, as if it's dangerous for a black man to read or think for himself. And note the quotation marks for own research. It's a subtle clue to the reader not to trust him. Like if I called Marco Silva a journalist. A warmer climate is good for life, Mr. Machogu wrongly claimed in a tweet. Wrongly? Here's the colonizer mentality. Marco Silva believes he can decide what Jasper's opinion should be. I'll think for you, boy. I'm from Canada, so I agree with Jasper that a warmer climate is good for life. I suspect most Brits would agree. I meet enough of them at Caribbean resorts in the winter. We're all trying to avoid the miserable cold. The British Broadcasting Corporation is hypocritical to criticize Jasper about fossil fuels. Britain launched the Industrial Revolution by burning dirty coal, exploited fossil fuels in its colonies, made a fortune on North Sea oil and gas, and now has per capita carbon emissions 20 times the level of Kenya. A celebrated Brit is Sir Richard Branson, founder of Virgin Airlines, and now with Virgin Galactic, promising space travel to tourists who don't care about their carbon footprint. Britain's most outspoken climate guru is King Charles, who lives in this palace with no wind turbines on the lawn. He's famous for going to climate conferences in private jets and once flew a helicopter to give a speech about lowering aircraft emissions when he could have driven. And while the BBC want you to believe Jasper's tweets are harmful to the planet, consider his carbon footprint. No car, no tractor, no air conditioner. The crops he cultivates grow by photosynthesis, which means they absorb CO2 from the air. The more crops he grows, the more CO2 it removes from the atmosphere. Anyone who cares about CO2 should want him to have more fertilizer and modern equipment to help him grow more food. Michael Schellenberger, a climate change believer, also points out that farms with fertilizer and equipment can produce more food with less land, meaning the surplus land could be used for reforestation or animal wildlife conservation. But back to the article. This is funny. Machogu had 25,000 followers on X when the article was written, 28,000 2 weeks later. So he gained 3,000 followers after people saw through the BBC's lies. The BBC's investigation uncovered this shocking fact that most users engaging with Jasper are actually based in the US, UK, and Canada. Jasper's posts are written in English, so no surprise to me his followers are from English-speaking countries. Actually, his fiercest critics are also from the US, UK, and Canada. Many of those users also promote conspiracy theories online, not just about climate change, but about vaccines, COVID-19, or the war in Ukraine. This is an attempt at guilt by association. BBC wants you to think Jasper is a pro-Putin, anti-vax conspiracy theorist, so you'll hate him even more for his views of fossil fuels. And I know from my previous video about the BBC that the insult conspiracy theorist is meaningless. In that video, I analyzed this article. 7 pages about the Great Reset conspiracy, and they didn't once say that COVID-19, the Great Reset, was a book written by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. Anyone who criticized ideas from the book was labeled a conspiracy theorist by BBC journalists, who didn't even admit the book's existence, let alone read it. African leaders agree with Jasper, but the gutless BBC wouldn't dare write a hit piece about them. The racism would have been much more obvious. And BBC doesn't have much credibility when it counters the African presidents with the opinions of a 24-year-old activist. With no credentials listed, BBC doesn't name the radical groups he belongs to, or who funds them, or how much Mr. Amanuk earns. This part is deceptive because it's completely out of context. There's some kind of warning. BBC wants you to think Jasper is a wingnut who falsely accuses activists of alarmism. Oh, how can he be so mean?
I want you to panic. And I want you to panic. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic.
Jasper was responding to Greta Thunberg's tweet, which was deleted. No problem, I have a screenshot. A top climate scientist is warning that climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. Dated June 2018. Greta makes ridiculous disaster tales, but the BBC labels her critics as conspiracy theorists spreading disinformation. Then Marco Silva implies again that Jasper was bought off by big oil. And that's funny because this story came out that Bill Gates, who owns businesses that profit from the climate change fears, paid the BBC $3.7 million. So maybe it's the BBC's climate reporting that's tainted. Oh, and here's a hypertext link so you could hear the smears you just read. They also smeared Jasper on X and Facebook. And the article ends by mentioning low climate literacy rates in Africa and conspiracy theories. So it's basically saying that the Africans are too misinformed to decide their own future. What a shameful piece of racist drivel. There was a backlash against the BBC. The Daily Skeptic debunked them in its story, "Why is BBC Verify smearing a Kenyan subsistence farmer?" And Thai Thuy Van Din sandblasted the BBC and Marco Silva in her Brownstone Institute piece. Other outlets interviewed Jasper to give him a fair shot to counter the BBC. Back on X, reaction is mostly positive for Jasper, but for the murders of white people in Africa, I hope you get nothing alongside your mother. Huh? Fossil fuels and the rest you're asking for will cause cancer and other Western illnesses. Manure is best. It's a blessing to be able to live as close to nature as possible. Acker implies that African fossil fuels will cause flooding, which will wipe out Mum's house. Jasper responds that with fossil fuels, they can make cement and steel that they could use to build stronger houses. Here's Honest Alder, who lives with plenty of fossil fuels, advising Jasper against them because they will reduce GDP and quality of life. Sitting on a couch a continent away, telling him how to live his life. Some posts advise Jasper to go completely electric, like electric threshing machines and tractors. Morons! How do you charge them? His village only has one power line and it shares 14 kilowatts a month. Stephen Streeter and others suggest that Africans skip fossil fuels and go straight to solar. Now, if Africans develop their own fossil fuels, the money and jobs will stay in those countries. To go solar, you have to buy from China. How do you pay? The solar panels are made from toxic materials in factories powered by dirty coal. They last 20 years, can't be recycled, so you start collecting toxic landfill. Worry later. Where do you put the panels? You could chop down forests, but those trees were already absorbing CO2. Put them in farmland and people starve. Maybe cover the Serengeti. Solve that animal fart problem. And you'll need massive amounts of land, because all of your industries will run on electricity, and you'll charge all of your vehicles. So you'll need a grid about 3 times the output of Western grids. Do all that, and you still won't even be able to turn on a light bulb at night. But the tragedy is that powerful people agree with Streeter. Rich countries have huge foreign aid budgets. There are UN development funds, World Bank, IMF, but none will finance African fossil fuels. They want the jump to solar. No money for reliable energy, but massive funding for abortion and birth control. Africans don't need energy if you could stop them from ever being born. Countries could develop their own fuels, but the UN and Western governments are pressuring them to toe the line in net zero. Bill Gates advises governments not to deal with such countries and take the approach, if you want to deal with us, you'll have to take climate change seriously. In stakeholder capitalism, World Economic Forum founder Klaus Schwab lamented that as wages in Ethiopia rose from 50 cents a day to $2, CO2 emissions tripled. Ethiopians still traveled by donkey and had little electricity, but Schwab still blamed them for future climate change. The same force that helps people escape from poverty and lead a decent life is the one that's destroying the livability of the planet for future generations. Even worse, climate guru Bill Gates wrote about meeting a family of 5 in Kenya, living in a mud hut farming a plot of land smaller than a baseball field. They start with 1 cow, and when they get 3 more, they sell off surplus milk to earn $4 a day, which creates a big problem for Gates. But if you remember the problems with cattle that I mentioned in Chapter 6, you'll recognize the dilemma right away. The Delams bought more cattle, and cattle contribute more to climate change than any other livestock. OMG! The guy with 4 private jets has a problem with the guy with 4 cows. Climate change, hypocrisy, and racism. For another video on BBC Lies, check out Fake News Propaganda Masterclass. And please follow Jesper Machogu on X and Substack. Part 8. See how the BBC manufactures conspiracies. I'm going to show you how the BBC manufactures fake conspiracy theories to get views. And how do I know this? Well, the BBC told me. In fact, they told everybody about it. They're so proud of their system, they posted it on their website. I'm going to share that with you. Then show you a shocking example of a fake BBC story that is so hateful, so deceitful, and frankly racist, that you will never trust the BBC again. So stay to the end to check that out. We start in the BBC's own words.
Welcome to BBC Verify. Like you said, we are a team of investigative journalists here at the BBC. We are also a new brand, and we are a physical location above the newsroom in London. And the point of the team, as you said, is to verify video, to fact check, to counter disinformation, and to analyse really complex stories so we can get to the truth of what's going on. Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them.
Let's write that down. We'll come back to it later.
Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them.
Then she shows off BBC's satellite tracking system and BBC's new broadcast building, and then gets into the phony verify stories.
And there are other ways that we also are able to interrogate what's going on, including on social media. I have some undercover accounts that I've set up for the BBC's Americast podcast, and we use these kinds of undercover accounts, and these are the characters that the accounts belong to be able to really understand polarization online.
Is anyone starting to feel dirty? They set up a pile of fraudulent accounts. Isn't that illegal? To weed out misinformation. Hey, doesn't mistruth cause really serious harm to society and people?
And they don't offer us a totally exhaustive insight into what's going on, but they can help us understand just how social media works. And then there's also investigating other mistruths and the real world harm they can cause. At the moment, I'm investigating the UK's conspiracy theory movement. I'm trying to understand more about how it's evolved and intensified since the pandemic here in the UK. I'm looking at the alternative media that finds itself at the heart of this movement, and a conspiracy theory newspaper that's a part of that as well. I'm looking at the way that alternative media is funded. I'm looking at its impact on local communities. I'm looking at its connections with far-right figures, and also its foreign links. That's for a podcast series that will be coming out in June.
LMAO, this chart is a conspiracy theory. Just like those joke conspiracy theories about lizard people. Though not quite as good as the paranoid delusional conspiracy from A Beautiful Mind. BBC's delusional conspiracy theory is that far-right figures are plotting to spread disinformation to harm society. And they have ties to an entire movement of other harmful conspiracy theories run through alternative media, which means any independent journalist who disagrees with the BBC. And these right-wingers are always funded through shady links and linked to foreign nations who don't care about local communities. BBC says they'll unveil so many of these conspiracies that they'll have a regular series. But they have no reports or complaints from the public about real-world harm to society, no leads, no evidence. That's why they need the fake accounts. But their real goal is political, and they show their bias, even by saying far right. If they really thought misinfo did real-world harm, they would investigate all of it. Right-wing, left-wing, or apolitical. So you can see right-wing is just a pejorative. The boogeyman to scare people for clicks. What if BBC can't find any conspirators because their whole idea is fictional? Well, people will lose their cushy jobs in posh climate-controlled BBC offices. And what would you do to get a great job? How about lie on your resume? One time, Miss Spring's potential editor found she fabricated an important part of her resume. Telling me you are a brilliant reporter who exercises integrity and honesty when you have literally demonstrated the opposite was a terrible idea. Yeah, and mistruth can cause real serious harm to society and people. Another funny detail, the job was in Russia. Ha! Those foreign links. But I digress. Now you'll see the BBC's sting operation in the real world. They find Jasper Machogu, Kenyan, too poor to sue the BBC if this story gets ugly. Organic farmer, not by choice, just can't afford chemical fertilizers and fancy sprays. Posts videos on Substack and X to teach the West about low-tech farm life. Smart guy starts a GoFundMe which raises $9,000 so the village can pump water out of a borehole so they don't have to walk to the river anymore for water. There's no Amazon delivery, not even a donkey cart, so they walk. This woman carries a bucket on her head and buckets in each hand, but that's still easier than going to the river. On X, Jasper posts a wish list. You can pause the video to read it. I'll just read out a few. Tractors, tap water. He doesn't even ask for hot water. And I want my mom to have a refrigerator someday. These things require energy, so Jasper likes to use the catchphrases fossil fuels for Africa and just stop toil, because farming with no machinery is brutally hard work. Now you watching the video, a decent human being, with this information, you might write the report like this. Hopeful farmer fights to lift community out of poverty. Instead, the BBC Verify fact-checkers published this. How a Kenyan farmer became a champion of climate change denial. Oh, I'm gonna be sick. And they also have a Facebook version and a podcast. He's flag bearer for fossil fuels in Africa. Makes him sound like CEO of ExxonMobil. His supercharged profile makes him the champion of the disinformation campaign. He's really, really dangerous, because if that conspiracy theory spreads, it could undermine climate action. And as Kenyan tractors are responsible for the weather in England, oh, this will hurt local communities. Like the reptilian chart, the conspiracy theory invented by the BBC makes its tenuous connections. So Jasper isn't just the champion of his conspiracy. He's connected to the greater conspiracy movement. BBC ties Jasper to unspecified conspiracy theories about vaccines, COVID, and Ukraine, with no evidence. It's just to multiply the hatred BBC can direct at him. If you got COVID, blame him. Alternative media. Anyone engaging with Jasper on any social media is also labeled a conspiracy theorist. Which brings us to funding. Oh, he's received thousands of dollars from fossil fuel interests. Just another fabrication. I'll read near the end to see it was only $9,000. It took 2 years to raise. Yes, it was the donations for the borehole. But later, BBC makes another claim, trying to link the money to oil company payoffs. They offer no names, no evidence. Like if they knew British Petroleum gave anything, they would tell us. Fabrication and innuendo. We've already seen funding linked to Western oil connections. But BBC is upset that most of his ex-followers aren't African. They're from US, UK, and Canada. Scandal! Ah, the real world harm. And BBC's manufactured plot isn't complete without connecting to a far-right figure. So they have to mention Jordan Peterson once retweeted Jasper. Oh, he's Canadian! There's another nefarious foreign link. So remember why the BBC is crucifying Jasper Machogu.
Why does this matter? Well, mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them.
So here's what mistruths they've fact-checked to stop serious harm. A warmer climate is good for life, Mr. Machogu wrongly claimed in a tweet. The BBC has become Orwell's Ministry of Truth. You can't even have your own opinion on the weather. There is no climate crisis. The Nobel winner for physics agrees, but BBC won't mess with that white guy. Funny if BBC's employees really believed we were in a crisis, they would be living a lifestyle like the Kenyans. It's not about truth, it's about party ranks. We need fossil fuels to develop our Africa, and climate change is a ploy by Western nations to keep Africa poor. Sounds extreme, but BBC proves them right in this very same article. BBC, a £5 billion Western corporation, cried scandal when a poor African village got a mere $9,000 for clean water. Read the conclusion of this article a couple times to understand the different levels of BBC racism. They say Africans should not decide for themselves their energy future because they're too climate illiterate. Meaning too stupid and ignorant. People who are highly paid to push Western net zero talking points argue that Africans should reject development as they're better off staying as they are. They shouldn't listen to Africans who want a better life because they are dangerous. In the holy name of climate change, they demonize Jasper Machogu, a man whose carbon footprint is zero, the enemy of the planet. They already possess every item on Jasper's wish list, but they would never sacrifice even one of them so Africans could have a share. These self-righteous BBC pricks have never lived a day without running water, electricity, and access to modern transportation. But Jasper's mum can never have a refrigerator for as long as she lives because it would cause real-world harm. How can people be so cruel to each other?